The year was 1899. A time caught between centuries. The world was shifting, science and industry rising, old traditions fading, and with them, shadows that grew darker than ever before. In this final year of the 19th century, one story emerged that unsettled even the most rational of minds. A story not found in history books, but whispered in fragments, hidden in archives, and preserved only through a handful of disturbing images. It began, as many chilling secrets do, with a child. He was no ordinary boy. Locals described him as a strange genius child, a prodigy whose brilliance was undeniable, yet unnerving. He spoke with an intelligence far beyond his years. He mastered mathematics, poetry, and even fragments of forbidden language taken from books he should never have touched. Yet, beneath his genius was something no teacher could explain, an obsession that grew darker with each passing day. At first glance, the old photographs of him seem harmless. A boy dressed neatly in 19th century attire, staring at the camera with a gaze too steady for a child his age. But look closely. The eyes hold no warmth, no innocence, only a hollow intensity, as though he were studying you. The eerie details do not stop there. One image shows him holding a small wooden box, his fingers clutching the edge tightly. The photograph offers no explanation of what rests inside, but rumors claimed it was something no child should ever have possessed. The town remembered him not as a playful spirit, but as a silent observer. While other children ran in the fields, he wandered graveyards. He would linger near funerals, not in mourning, but in fascination, watching the slow procession of death as though it were a lesson written just for him. Some say he was drawn to post-mortem photography, the macabre Victorian tradition of photographing the dead. He would stare at those images for hours, memorizing every lifeless detail, as though learning a secret hidden from the living. In his notebooks, fragments that still survive, he sketched faces without smiles, hands without movement, eyes forever closed. These sketches were so precise, so haunting, that they blurred the line between art and obsession. The boy's family was respected, but whispers surrounded them. A strange family, withdrawn from their neighbors, protective of the child no one could understand. Their home was said to hold chilling secrets, locked rooms, collections of medical books, and whispers of experiments carried out in silence. Some believed the boy's talents were not natural, that his brilliance was fed by something sinister, something that demanded a price. As the story spread, villagers began to avoid him. Mothers pulled their children away from his path. Shopkeepers noticed how he would linger too long by displays of butchered meat, his gaze fixed, unblinking. Others swore they saw him at night, lantern in hand, moving slowly between the gravestones, as though speaking to the dead. Whether it was superstition or truth, no one dared confront him. Yet, the most unsettling accounts were not of what he did, but of what he knew. Teachers claimed he wrote entire passages in a language no one recognized. Some called it Latin. Others believed it to be older, a forbidden tongue not spoken for centuries. When asked where he learned such things, he would simply smile, a faint, unnatural smile that unsettled even the bravest among them. One photograph in particular remains the most disturbing. In it, he sits beside a table. On the table rests a small object, covered in cloth. His hands are folded neatly in his lap. At first glance, it is unremarkable, but look closer, and a faint outline emerges beneath the cloth. An outline that suggests something fragile, something lifeless. Some historians believe it was an animal. Others whisper it was far worse. Whatever the truth, the photograph radiates unease, as though the camera captured not only his likeness, but the darkness that lingered inside him. This is how the legend of the strange genius child began. With old photos, forgotten events, and the unsettling history of a boy who seemed lost in time. His story would not fade quietly. Instead, it grew, twisting into an unsolved mystery that would haunt the town long after his disappearance. Because the boy did not grow into a man. His life, like his obsession, ended abruptly, his fate sealed in shadows. Some say he vanished. Others insist his family hid the truth to protect him, or themselves. Whatever happened, the boy's image remained. That unblinking gaze, that silent obsession, that lingering question, what exactly was inside the box he held so tightly in 1899? And more importantly, why does the photograph still feel alive? By the closing months of 1899, whispers of the boy's brilliance spread quietly through the town. To his teachers, he was nothing short of extraordinary. He recited poetry from memory with the voice of an adult. He solved equations most scholars struggled with. His handwriting, delicate yet deliberate, appeared like the work of a man decades older. He seemed destined to be remembered, not for scandal, but for genius. But genius, when unchecked, often hides something far more unsettling. Inside the classroom, the boy's eyes rarely wandered. He absorbed every detail, as though nothing escaped him. While other children fidgeted, he sat unnervingly still, watching, calculating. His teachers praised him, but in the same breath, they confessed unease. There was something in his stare, too heavy, too knowing. It was the look of a child who had seen things no child should see. At home, his obsession with learning became relentless. He devoured books without rest, history, science, languages both familiar and strange. He scribbled notes in margins, often switching tongues mid-sentence, as though guided by voices only he understood. Some of these writings were later found in a forbidden language, one scholars could not fully translate. A language linked to occult manuscripts hidden deep within old libraries. But his restless soul could not remain in books alone. He was drawn to images, disturbing images. He would spend hours tracing illustrations of anatomy, bones, muscles, organs. Sometimes he copied them with eerie precision, but at other times, he changed the details. Bones elongated, skulls distorted, faces left hollow-eyed. His notebooks became filled with these chilling secrets, pages that blurred the line between study and obsession. It was around this time that his family began to notice peculiar behavior. Late at night, he could be heard moving about, long after the lamps had been extinguished. The faint sound of paper tearing, the quiet shuffle of small objects being placed, rearranged, hidden. When questioned, he only smiled faintly and returned to silence. The boy's mother insisted he was simply gifted, misunderstood by those too ordinary to appreciate his talents. But neighbors saw something else. They spoke of him watching other children from a distance, never joining their play, only observing with cold intensity. Some claimed their pets went missing, only for strange sketches of those very animals to appear later in his notebooks. A chilling coincidence. Or perhaps, something darker. His father, a man of rigid pride, refused to acknowledge anything unusual. To him, the boy was destined for greatness. But the father's silence carried weight. Some wondered if he feared his son, or if he knew a truth he dared not speak aloud. Among the most unsettling details were his habits during funerals. The boy attended them with disturbing frequency, even for strangers. He would stand at the edge of the crowd, unblinking, watching the coffins lowered into the earth. When the mourners wept, his expression remained fixed, neither sadness nor joy, but fascination, as though the act of death itself was a lesson unfolding before him. Old photographs taken around this time show him with the family. At first glance, they seem like any portrait of the era. The boy sits between his parents, hands folded neatly. Yet, if you look closely, the unease returns. While his parents' eyes gaze naturally toward the lens, his do not. His stare cuts through the frame, unwavering, as though aimed directly at the viewer, across time, across generations. In another photograph, his hands rest upon a book. The cover is blurred, but some claim it was no ordinary text. Scholars who studied the image later believed it to be a rare edition of a medical manual, one not easily obtained by a child. How he came into possession of such material remains a mystery, a piece of unsettling history lost in time. Those who knew him described his intelligence as frightening, not inspiring. One teacher confessed in a letter, "He is a boy of remarkable gifts, but I feel no joy in teaching him. When he looks at me, it is as though he is waiting for me to falter, as though he already knows more than I ever could." And yet, his restless soul demanded more. Knowledge alone was not enough. He sought experiences that blurred the boundaries of learning and obsession. Graveyards became classrooms. Post-mortem photographs became textbooks. Death itself, it seemed, had become his teacher. The strange family that sheltered him grew more reclusive. Curtains remained drawn. Neighbors claimed the sound of glass jars clinking could be heard from within. Rumors spread of preserved insects, dissected birds, perhaps even stranger collections, kept hidden in the attic. None of it was proven, but the whispers alone deepened the town's fear. It was clear the child's life was not following the path of a scholar. His mind, brilliant and restless, was steering him somewhere else. Somewhere darker. Those who saw him in the streets remembered one thing above all: the stillness. While others moved, he did not. While others looked away, he stared too long. He was a child in form, but something in him felt older, heavier, as though he carried not a future, but a burden of knowledge too vast for his years. The genius child was becoming something else. Something the town was not ready to face. And then the first true signs of his obsession would surface. Signs that turned whispers into fear, and fear into something much worse. The first true signs of the boy's obsession emerged quietly, like cracks spreading through glass, barely visible at first, then impossible to ignore. It began with his notebooks. What should have been filled with lessons and practice became something else entirely. Pages that started with equations ended with crude sketches. But these were no ordinary drawings. They were anatomical in nature. Bones shaded with eerie precision, muscles peeled back, organs rendered in disturbing detail. For a child of his age, such accuracy was impossible, unless, of course, he had seen it with his own eyes. When neighbors whispered about missing animals, those same sketches began to take on new meaning. Cats vanished. Birds no longer sang in familiar trees. The townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances, their suspicions never spoken aloud. But deep down, they wondered, had the boy's restless mind already crossed a line? His obsession with death became undeniable. He attended funerals not with grief, but with fascination. Standing silently at the edge of crowds, his gaze fixed not on the mourners, but on the coffin. Witnesses claimed he would stare for hours after others had left, as though memorizing every motion of the grave diggers, every shovelful of soil. But the most unsettling discoveries came from within his family's own home. One evening, his mother entered his room and found a row of jars arranged on the floor. Inside were insects, frogs, and even small birds, each preserved in murky fluid, their bodies suspended as though frozen in time. When she asked him why, he responded not with fear or guilt, but with calm explanation: "So they won't be forgotten." The words carried no malice, but something about the way he spoke them chilled her to the core. Soon after, his father uncovered a collection of bones hidden beneath the bed. Tiny skeletons, carefully arranged, some tied together with string. The boy had labeled them, as though cataloging a private museum. The parents, torn between pride in their son's brilliance and dread of his darkness, chose silence. To reveal the truth would invite shame. And so, behind closed doors, the obsession was allowed to grow. Old photographs from this period capture the shift. At first glance, they are nothing unusual. A boy posed beside his family, or seated at a desk. But when studied closely, eerie details emerge. In one image, his hand rests on a sketchbook. A faint outline can be seen on the open page, a drawing of a skull, disturbingly lifelike. In another, his eyes appear too sharp, too focused, as if staring past the photographer and into some hidden truth. It was not only animals that fascinated him. He began to sketch human figures, always lifeless, always still. Neighbors recalled seeing him wander graveyards alone, notebook in hand, kneeling beside tombstones. Some swore they caught him peering into freshly dug graves, watching intently as though searching for something just beneath the soil. Whispers spread quickly through the town. Some said he was cursed. Others believed the family harbored secrets older than themselves, rituals whispered in forbidden language, taught to a child too young to understand their weight. A few even suggested he was not a prodigy at all, but something else entirely. Something unnatural. The unease only deepened when a photograph surfaced that shocked even those who had defended him. In the image, he sits in a darkened room, a small wooden box at his side. His expression is flat, cold, unreadable. At first glance, the box is ordinary, but a faint bulge beneath the lid hints at something inside. Some claimed it contained one of his collections. Others whispered it was far worse, that the outline resembled the curled form of a bird, or perhaps something larger. The truth was never revealed. Historians later debated the photograph endlessly. Was it staged? Was the boy simply misunderstood? Or had the camera, in that single flash, captured evidence of an obsession spiraling into horror? Whatever the answer, one thing became clear. The child's fascination with death was no passing curiosity. It had become the center of his life. Every drawing, every collection, every eerie detail of his behavior pointed to a truth his family could no longer ignore. Yet, rather than confront him, they withdrew further from the world. The house grew darker. Curtains stayed drawn. Guests were no longer welcomed. And behind those walls, the boy's obsession deepened, unchecked and unseen. But obsessions have a way of breaking free. Secrets, no matter how carefully hidden, always find their way into the light. And soon, the town would witness a chilling act that could no longer be dismissed as genius or misunderstood curiosity. An act that would transform whispers into fear, and fear into something much darker. Behind the tall curtains of that quiet home, the strange family carried a silence that grew heavier with each passing night. Outwardly, they remained respectable. The father, proud and stoic. The mother, polite but withdrawn. To neighbors, they appeared cautious, perhaps even weary, but no one truly knew what secrets lived behind those locked doors. Inside, the boy's obsession was no longer a hidden quirk. It was a presence that seemed to seep into every corner of the house. His room, once a place of innocent study, had transformed into something unsettling. Jars of preserved insects lined the shelves. Drawings were scattered across the floor, skulls, skeletal hands, faces drained of life. And in the dim candlelight, the boy's shadow stretched unnaturally long against the walls, moving slowly as he worked. His mother sometimes entered quietly, hoping to catch him in the act, to prove her fears wrong. But each time, she found something worse. On one occasion, she discovered a bird's wing pinned open across a wooden board, every feather meticulously arranged. On another, she found a page torn from a medical book, copied by hand into her son's careful script. When she asked him about it, his reply was simple, delivered in that calm, unsettling tone. "I only wanted to see how it worked." The father dismissed it as childish curiosity. "He is brilliant," he told his wife, "and brilliance often looks strange to ordinary eyes." But even he could not ignore the late-night noises. The scratching, the tearing of paper, the soft murmur of words spoken in a language no one in the house understood. Neighbors began to notice that the family no longer mingled. The curtains remained closed even on bright mornings. The windows, once open to let in air, were now shuttered tight. Visitors who knocked often left without reply. It was as though the house itself was retreating from the town, pulling inward into its own shadow. And in that silence, the boy grew stranger still. Accounts describe him wandering through the halls at night, his bare feet silent on the wooden floors. His mother, awake and listening, sometimes followed at a distance. She watched as he moved from room to room, touching objects as though arranging them in a pattern only he could see. Sometimes he stopped in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection with such intensity that she dared not interrupt. Other times, she swore she heard him whispering, words too faint to catch, words that sounded wrong, twisted, almost like a forbidden language. The family began to live in constant unease. Meals were eaten in silence. The father refused to acknowledge the jars that multiplied in the boy's room. The mother prayed, clutching her rosary at night, though she never admitted what she prayed for. And the boy? He continued his work, his genius unraveling into obsession. One story, passed down in hushed tones, describes a moment when the mother entered the boy's room and found him sketching. He did not notice her at first. The page showed a human face, eyes closed, lips pale, skin shaded with disturbing care. But it was not just any face. It was hers. She asked him why he had drawn it, but he offered no answer, only a faint smile that never reached his eyes. By now, fear had settled into the household like dust on forgotten furniture. The father grew angrier, retreating into silence, unwilling to confront what he could not explain. The mother grew paler, her voice trembling whenever she spoke of her son. And the boy? The boy seemed only more content within his secret world, as though their unease was the very soil in which his obsession thrived. Old photographs from this period capture the family together. But the images are wrong. The father sits stiffly, his jaw tight. The mother's smile appears forced, brittle, and the boy, always at the center, stares without emotion. Look closely at one of these photos, and you'll notice something unsettling. In the blurred corner of the frame, a jar sits half hidden on the floor. Inside, a dark shape floats, too indistinct to identify, yet unmistakably organic. How such a detail escaped notice at the time remains one of the eerie details historians still debate. The silence inside the home was not just fear. It was complicity. By saying nothing, by doing nothing, the family allowed the darkness to deepen. Their house became a vessel for secrets, a place where whispers of death and obsession lingered in every shadow. And yet silence cannot last forever. Soon, the boy's strange behaviors would begin to seep beyond the walls of his family's home. The town that had once only whispered about him would soon be forced to confront him directly. And when they did, their unease would shift into something far worse. Something that could not be silenced, hidden, or denied. By the turn of that final year of the century, silence could no longer contain the boy's shadow. What had begun within the walls of his family's home had begun to spill outward, staining the town itself. People whispered in the markets, in the churches, in the narrow cobblestone streets. The name of the strange genius child was no longer spoken with pride, but with caution, sometimes even fear. Shopkeepers told unsettling stories. One described how the boy would stand for long minutes in front of the butcher's display, his gaze fixed not on the customers, but on the carcasses hanging behind the glass. Another swore that he once found the boy tracing his finger along the outline of a severed lamb's head, whispering something in a language the shopkeeper could not recognize. He claimed the words were slow, deliberate, and wrong, as though the boy were reciting a forbidden language only he could understand. Children had begun to avoid him altogether. When he appeared near the schoolyard, games would halt. Laughter would vanish, replaced by tense silence. They said his stare followed them even when they turned away. Some believed he could read their thoughts. Others swore he had cursed them with nothing more than a glance. Mothers warned their daughters never to walk alone if he was nearby. Fathers muttered that no good could come from a child who lingered too long among the dead. And the graveyards, always the graveyards. He was seen there often, lantern in hand, moving slowly among the stones as though counting them. On certain nights, witnesses swore they heard him whispering at the foot of fresh graves, his voice low, steady, and cold. The gravediggers refused to work after dusk once they found his footprints circling newly dug soil. To them, the boy was no longer a child, but something older, something unnatural. The rumors began to twist into darker forms. Some said he had spoken of vanished children, names of those long buried, spoken aloud as if he knew them personally. Others claimed they saw him carrying a box beneath his coat late one night, slipping into the woods where no one dared follow. When asked, the family dismissed these tales as cruel gossip. But gossip has its own power, and soon the boy's name became inseparable from unease. The most disturbing whispers came from the church. A priest recalled finding the boy alone in the back pews during a funeral service. He was not praying. He was sketching. When asked to show his paper, he revealed an image so unsettling the priest later refused to describe it in detail. All he would say was this: it was not of the living, but of something that belonged beneath the earth. The priest locked the drawing away, but the memory of it haunted him until his final days. Old photographs taken during this time reflect the change. In one, the boy stands with other children at the edge of a classroom. But unlike them, he does not smile, does not move. His hands clutch a notebook tightly against his chest. Look closely, and you will see faint outlines on the book's cover, strange markings, too blurred to decipher, yet eerily deliberate. Another photograph shows him seated outside his family home. His parents stand behind him, their faces weary, almost hollow. The boy stares forward, expressionless, and just beside his chair, half hidden in shadow, sits the unmistakable outline of a jar. Its contents are blurred, but the shape within suggests something suspended, something lifeless. The town could not agree on what he was. Some believed he was cursed, his mind poisoned by forbidden knowledge. Others saw him as a genius so far ahead of his time that his strangeness was mistaken for madness. But there were darker theories as well. Whispers that his family was not merely eccentric, but part of something older, an order that studied death, an order that passed their secrets into their children. Whether fact or folklore, the stories grew with every passing night. And still, the family remained silent. Their shutters stayed closed, their voices rarely carried beyond their doorstep. The more the town whispered, the more the boy seemed to thrive. It was as though he drew power from their fear, feeding on their suspicion, growing colder, stranger, and more consumed by his dark obsession. But whispers have consequences. Fear festers, suspicion spreads, and silence cannot last forever. Soon, a discovery would be made, one that confirmed the town's worst fears. A discovery that proved the boy's obsession was no longer confined to drawings, jars, or photographs. Something had crossed a line. Something that could not be explained away as mere curiosity. And when it was uncovered, the town's whispers would turn into panic. The whispers turned to certainty when the boy's secret was discovered. It began with a single accident, a door left unlocked, a drawer left open, or perhaps a moment when his family's silence slipped into carelessness. Whatever the cause, what lay hidden in that room came spilling into the light. At first glance, his chamber looked ordinary. A desk, a narrow bed, stacks of books piled too high for a child his age. But beneath the surface, the room was a museum of the macabre. Jars lined the shelves, filled with murky liquid that distorted the objects floating within. Insects, their wings stiff and torn. Frogs, their eyes bulging unnaturally. Small birds, feathers pressed flat against the glass. All preserved, catalogued, arranged with obsessive care. But these were only the beginning. In a locked chest beneath the bed, more disturbing items were uncovered. Small bones, wrapped carefully in cloth, labeled in his precise handwriting. Feathers tied with string. A collection of skulls, tiny, fractured, some belonging to animals too small to identify. The labels were clinical, almost scientific, but the chilling details betrayed something else. A fascination with decay, with fragility, with death itself. One notebook lay among these objects, and within its pages, the full extent of his obsession was revealed. Drawings of human faces, drained of life, captured in unsettling detail. Some resembled old photographs of the dead, the kind taken in the tradition of post-mortem photography. Others seemed entirely imagined, yet no less lifelike. The eyes were always closed, the skin pale, the mouth silent. Every line drawn with the precision of a child who did not merely imagine death, but studied it. A page torn halfway revealed something more disturbing still. Words written in a language no one could recognize. Scholars who later examined the fragments argued endlessly over their meaning. Some said they resembled fragments of Latin, twisted and broken. Others claimed it was a forbidden language, one whispered only in occult texts lost to time. Whatever the truth, it was not the writing of an ordinary child. Neighbors who caught glimpses of these collections never forgot them. One visitor, who claimed to have been invited briefly into the home, swore he saw the jars himself. They were not trophies, he said, years later. They were lessons. He studied them the way another boy might study maps or music. His words still linger in accounts of the boy's life, a chilling testimony to the darkness that lived behind those shuttered windows. And then there were the photographs. Among his belongings, several old photos were found, images of strangers, blurred and faded, faces pale and expressionless. Some were identified as post-mortem photographs, relics of grieving families who sought to capture their loved ones one final time, but others could not be traced. Unknown faces, unknown bodies, some posed with eerie stillness, others captured in shadow. Why the boy possessed them remains a mystery. Had he collected them from abandoned estates? Had his family provided them? Or were they gifts passed down from something far more sinister? The most unsettling of all was a photograph where the boy himself appeared. He sits beside a table, his expression flat, his gaze unflinching. On the table rests a jar, identical to those found in his room. Within it, something small floats, its outline blurred, its identity hidden. At first glance, the photograph appears ordinary. But the longer one looks, the more disturbing it becomes. The shape within the jar seems almost human. Too small for certainty, but too detailed to dismiss. A haunting image, preserved forever in grainy black and white. The family's silence grew heavier after these discoveries. The mother, pale and withdrawn, clutched her rosary more tightly. The father avoided the topic altogether, pretending the collections did not exist. But the boy himself showed no shame. He continued his work, sketching, arranging, cataloging. His genius had become an obsession, his obsession a prison from which he showed no desire to escape. The town's whispers reached a fever pitch. Was he merely a gifted child who had wandered too far into forbidden knowledge? Or was he something else, something not entirely of this world? A vessel of old secrets, carrying a sinister past into the present? The jars, the notebooks, the photographs, all of it spoke to a mind consumed by death. And yet, there was more. For hidden among his collections were objects that raised questions no one could answer. A scrap of cloth stained dark with age, a lock of hair tied with ribbon, and a series of drawings too detailed to have been imagined. Drawings of lifeless hands, twisted into positions only the dead could hold. Every piece suggested a truth no one wanted to face. The boy's obsession was no longer confined to animals, sketches, or stories. It had grown beyond that. His gaze had turned towards something greater, something far more disturbing. And soon, the town would discover that his collections were not finished. For there was one more object yet to be found, one that would horrify the townsfolk, and forever mark the strange genius child as something darker than anyone had dared to whisper. The photograph emerged like a curse whispered into the town's ear. At first, only a handful of people had seen it, passed from trembling hand to trembling hand in the shadows of whispered conversations. But once its existence became known, it consumed every discussion, every rumor, every hushed prayer spoken in the darkened pews of the local church. At first glance, the image seemed ordinary enough. A child, sitting stiffly in a chair, eyes fixed on the camera with the solemn intensity so common in old photos. The edges were faded, the paper fragile with time. Yet the longer one stared, the more the unease grew. Something felt profoundly wrong. Look closely, and the details become unbearable. On the small table beside the boy sits a glass jar. The liquid within has darkened with age, turning the object inside into a shadowy blur. But those who studied the image swore they could make out the shape, a hand, delicate and limp, as if belonging to something far too young, far too human. Some dismissed it as a trick of the light. A feather, a folded cloth, nothing more than an accident of exposure. But others insisted otherwise. To them, it was no illusion. It was evidence, proof of the boy's dark obsession, captured forever in black and white. And then there was the boy's face. Children in photographs of that era were often solemn. Long exposure times demanded stillness, and smiles were rare. Yet his expression was different. His eyes, unblinking and unyielding, seemed to pierce directly into the viewer. His lips were pressed so tightly together it was as if he were guarding a secret he refused to release. The longer one gazed, the more suffocating his presence became. Some even claimed the eyes followed them across the room, a trick of shadow that only deepened the photograph's unsettling power. The origins of the image remained shrouded in mystery. Some believed it was taken by a traveling photographer who never returned to town. Others swore it was captured by the father himself, who was rumored to have owned a camera, an unusual possession for an ordinary family of 1899. Yet no records survive. No negatives. Only the single, weathered copy that somehow endured the passing years. Whispers spread quickly. Was it a relic of post-mortem photography? A tradition where grieving families pose their dead children as though still alive, stiff in their Sunday best? Or was it something darker, an image of a child not mourning the dead, but celebrating them? The townsfolk avoided speaking of it openly, yet curiosity gnawed at them like rats in the walls. Some broke under the weight of their own fascination, sneaking to glimpse the image, only to recoil in horror. Others swore it was cursed, claiming they dreamt of the boy's face after seeing it. They awoke drenched in sweat. The memory of his unblinking gaze burned into their minds. A few even reported hearing whispers in the night, fragmented words in a language they could not understand, a forbidden language they recognized only from the boy's notebooks. The family, as always, denied everything. They claimed the photograph had been tampered with, that malicious neighbors had twisted something innocent into something monstrous. But their protests rang hollow. Too much had been seen. Too many had felt the weight of its eerie details pressing down on them. What made the image unbearable, however, was not just the jar or the boy's lifeless stare. It was the background. Behind him, in the dim shadows of the photograph, shapes seemed to emerge. At first, they appeared to be nothing more than smudges, imperfections in the exposure, but when studied closely, they formed outlines. Faint silhouettes. Some swore they saw the figure of a woman, standing behind him, her face hidden, her hands resting on his shoulders. Others claimed there were multiple shapes, hunched and watching, their features blurred into oblivion. Whether these were tricks of light or something far more sinister, no one could agree, but the photograph's reputation only grew. To some, it was proof of the boy's unnatural obsession. To others, it was evidence of something darker, that his family was complicit, their silence not born of shame, but of fear. And then came the story of the photograph's disappearance. It was said that one night, after the whispers reached their peak, the photograph was stolen from the family home. Some claimed it was destroyed, burned to ashes in a desperate attempt to break its curse. Others insisted it was hidden, passed down secretly, kept safe by those who wished its mystery never to be forgotten. Even now, its true fate remains unknown. But legends linger, as they always do. In certain circles of collectors, rumors still surface of an image matching its description: a boy with unblinking eyes, a jar with something unspeakable inside, and shadows that never rest. Some claim it has been sold in hidden auctions, treated as a forbidden artifact of dark history. Others whisper that anyone who dares to possess it meets an untimely end, their lives unraveling in strange and terrifying ways. The unsettling photograph became more than evidence. It became a curse, a haunting reminder that some images are not meant to be seen, that within the grainy texture of old photos, truths can hide, truths too disturbing to belong to the world of the living. And yet, the photograph was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something far more sinister, because what the boy created next would not be confined to drawings, jars, or fading images. His obsession had grown restless, demanding something greater, something that would stain the town forever. By the closing months of 1899, the weight of the boy's obsession could no longer be contained. The collections, the notebooks, the unsettling photograph, each had built toward something inevitable. His family's uneasy silence had fractured into fear. His neighbors avoided his gaze, whispering that his house was no longer a home, but a shrine to death. And the boy himself, he was changing. Those who saw him in the final weeks spoke of a restlessness that clung to him like a shadow. He wandered the narrow streets alone, eyes darting toward graveyards, alleys, and abandoned houses. He lingered near the churchyard at dusk, staring at headstones long after others had gone. Some claimed he spoke to the dead, whispering words in that strange, forbidden language that had filled his notebooks. Others swore they saw him carrying jars even larger than before, heavy with new specimens, his thin arms straining beneath the weight. At home, the atmosphere was unbearable. The mother's health had declined, her rosary clutched so tightly the beads left indentations in her fingers. She prayed constantly, as if prayer itself might build a wall strong enough to contain what her son was becoming. The father, pale and withdrawn, refused to acknowledge the truth. He buried himself in work, avoiding the boy's gaze, pretending not to hear the sounds that came from his room at night, scraping, whispering, the clink of glass. But the boy's hunger had grown beyond animals, beyond photographs, beyond collections. His sketches revealed a new fixation. Human figures, lifeless, pale, always marked by eerie details too precise to be mere imagination. A hand twisted at an unnatural angle. A face half covered in shadow, mouth stitched into silence. The townsfolk whispered that these drawings resembled people who had gone missing, vanished children, strangers who passed through and were never seen again. Was it coincidence? Or had his obsession crossed a boundary from which there was no return? The breaking point came on a night when the wind carried a strange stillness, heavy and suffocating. According to fragments of testimony, the boy locked himself in his room for days. Food left at his door remained untouched. No footsteps, no voices, only the low hum of something unearthly. When finally the door was forced open, the sight within would scar those who entered. The jars were gone, the shelves stripped bare. In their place stood new constructions, structures of bone and wire, grotesque shapes that seemed almost human. They were assembled with obsessive precision, as though he had attempted to rebuild life from the fragments he had collected. Some resembled skeletons, incomplete but unmistakably human in form. Others were hybrid monstrosities, animal bones fused with human shapes, heads twisted at impossible angles, limbs that bent like broken marionettes. In the center of the room stood his masterpiece, a figure assembled from countless fragments, posed as though caught mid-prayer. Its hollow sockets stared into nothing. Its mouth was open wide, as if to scream. Around its base lay the remnants of his notebooks, torn pages scrawled with that forbidden language, the ink so heavy it bled through the paper like black blood. But the most chilling discovery lay not in what was built, but in what was missing. The bones of certain figures were too delicate, too small, to have come from animals. They matched neither dog nor bird, nor any ordinary specimen. They were the bones of children, or so the whispers claimed. No records confirm it, but the town's missing children were never seen again, and the drawings found among his work bore faces too familiar to dismiss as coincidence. The family, confronted with the horror, fell into silence deeper than ever before. The father destroyed what he could, burning fragments in the fireplace, burying the rest beneath the floorboards. The mother collapsed, her prayers now frantic screams that echoed through the night. And the boy? He did not resist. He stood calmly as they tore apart his work, his eyes distant, his lips whispering words no one could understand. From that night onward, the house became a place of dread. Neighbors refused to enter. Children crossed the street to avoid its shadow. The smell of smoke clung to it, but beneath that odor was something far more foul, something that seeped from the very walls. Those who passed by swore they heard faint tapping, as though jars were still clinking together in the dark. Others claimed they saw faces in the upstairs window, pale and motionless, even when the boy himself was nowhere to be found. The breaking point had been reached. His obsession could no longer be dismissed as the strange hobbies of a gifted child. It had become a curse, a legacy of death and silence that spread fear through every corner of the town. And though the family tried to erase the evidence, to bury the unsettling truth, they could not bury the whispers. For the boy's dark genius had left scars too deep to heal, scars that would fester long after the year 1899 had ended. And worse still, his work was not finished. The boy's story reached its most chilling turn not with a discovery, but with an absence. For one morning, in the final days of that haunted year, his room was found empty. The bed untouched, the desk abandoned, the floor scattered with fragments of torn pages and broken glass. The boy, so restless, so consumed by his dark obsession, was simply gone. At first, the family claimed he had wandered off, that perhaps he was hiding in the woods as children sometimes did. But the town knew better. He had vanished in the night, and no ordinary disappearance could explain what was left behind. The door to his chamber was locked from the inside, the windows nailed shut. Yet the boy had escaped, leaving no sign of passage. Only a single open notebook remained on the desk, its final page filled with frantic scribbles in that forbidden language. The words slanted downward as though written in a frenzy, breaking off mid-sentence, as if interrupted by something unseen. Whispers spread quickly through the streets. Some believed he had been taken, claimed by the very forces he had courted with his obsessions. Others muttered darker suspicions, that his family had finally silenced him to protect their name, burying both child and secrets deep in the earth. And then there were those who swore he had simply dissolved into the shadows, pulled into another world, lost in time. The search began with urgency, but it carried an unease unlike any ordinary hunt for a missing child. The woods were combed, the river dragged, the graveyard searched stone by stone. Dogs refused to enter the family's house, howling when led toward the boy's room. Men with lanterns reported strange lights flickering among the gravestones, faint whispers that seemed to mimic the boy's voice. One man claimed he saw a small figure dart between the trees, moving with unnatural speed, vanishing before his eyes. No trace was ever found. No footprints, no belongings, no body, and yet his presence lingered. The family spoke little, but their silence was louder than any denial. The father aged rapidly, shoulders bent beneath the burden of a secret he could not share. The mother withdrew entirely, praying in endless cycles, her voice hoarse, her eyes vacant. Their house fell into decay, shutters sagging, walls peeling. Neighbors crossed themselves as they passed by, convinced the boy had never truly left. The photograph fueled the fire of speculation. Without the boy to answer, the unsettling image became proof of everything. Some claimed the jar on the table had been his offering to forces unknown, a ritual captured on film. Others believed the blurred shadows behind him were the ones who had come to collect him, finally taking him as their own. The photograph's reputation shifted from eerie curiosity to cursed relic. No one dared touch it. But the most disturbing accounts came from those who claimed to have seen him after his disappearance. A child's silhouette standing at the edge of the graveyard at dusk, a pale face in the upper window of the abandoned house. Some swore they saw him reflected in glass, shop windows, mirrors, even the surface of the river, always watching, always silent, his gaze unblinking. One woman, whose testimony was whispered years later, claimed the boy visited her in a dream. He stood at the foot of her bed, holding a jar in his hands. Inside, something shifted in the liquid, too small to name, too human to deny. He said nothing, only lifted the jar toward her before vanishing into the dark. She awoke screaming, convinced she had seen the truth of what he had become. The vanishing soon transformed into legend. For some, it was a tale of divine punishment, a warning of what happens when genius strays into forbidden realms. For others, it was a mystery, unsolved and unsettling, a reminder that some disappearances are not accidents, but invitations into something darker. But perhaps the most disturbing possibility was the simplest of all, that he had not vanished, but evolved, that his obsession had carried him into a place beyond reach, where he continued his collections, his sketches, his rituals, forever trapped in that dark genius, forever lost in time. The town would never forget the strange child of 1899. His name faded from records. His family line withered in silence. But the story endured, whispered generation after generation. And always, the details returned to the same haunting image: a boy with unblinking eyes, a jar on the table, and a silence that devoured him whole. His vanishing was not an end. It was a beginning, the first step into a mystery that refuses to die, a shadow that clings to history like a stain no fire can erase. And even now, more than a century later, the question lingers. Did he disappear into the night by human hands? Or did something far older, far darker, finally claim what was always theirs? Time moved forward. The century turned, the world changed, and the town where it all began tried to bury the memory of that strange child from 1899. Yet some stains do not fade. They remain etched into history like scars on flesh, impossible to erase. The boy's name was seldom spoken, erased from records, whispered only in fragments of rumor. His family, broken and silent, faded into obscurity. The house decayed, its windows dark, its roof collapsing inward like a body surrendering to rot. Eventually, it was abandoned altogether. And yet, even in ruin, people avoided it. Children dared one another to touch its walls, but none dared enter. Travelers passing through claimed they felt a chill when they walked by, as though unseen eyes watched from the shadows. The photograph survived. How? No one can say. Some insist it was destroyed, others whisper it was hidden, passed down in secret, an artifact of unsettling history. Yet rumors of its existence continue to surface. Collectors of disturbing images and forbidden relics speak of an old photo, blurred and fragile, that brings nightmares to anyone who stares too long. The boy's eyes, they say, still pierce through the decades. The jar beside him still conceals its blurred secret. And in the background, the shadows still whisper. The legacy of this strange genius child lies not in what he created, but in the questions he left behind. Did his obsession consume him, pulling him into madness until he vanished from the world? Or was his disappearance something far more sinister? A child claimed by the very forces he studied, lost in time, his collections continuing in some place beyond human reach. Every retelling changes the details, but the core remains the same. A boy who should have been celebrated as gifted became instead a symbol of dread. His notebooks filled with forbidden language. His jars lined with eerie details too unsettling to dismiss. His sketches resembling vanished children. His photograph, a chilling artifact of mystery, one of the most disturbing images whispered about in the annals of dark history. And perhaps that is his true legacy. Not genius, not tragedy, but fear. He has become part of a lineage of forgotten events, unsolved mysteries, and sinister pasts. His story joins those of vanished children, strange families, haunted places, and chilling secrets that linger where history fails to explain. He is no longer just a child of 1899. He is an echo, a reminder that some minds are not touched by brilliance, but by something far darker. Even now, more than a century later, stories surface. A pale face glimpsed in a mirror. A child's voice whispering in an unknown tongue. A shadow in the corner of a photograph that was not there before. Always small details, fleeting, easily dismissed. But to those who know the story, they feel like warnings. As if his obsession was not buried with time. As if it still spreads, like roots beneath the soil, reaching toward us even now. And so, the question remains. Was he merely a gifted child who walked too close to the edge of darkness? Or was he something else entirely, an instrument, a vessel, a bridge between the world of the living and whatever waits beyond? Perhaps we will never know. Perhaps we are not meant to. But the unsettling truth is this. Once you know his story, once you've seen his photograph in your mind, you cannot forget him. He lingers. In thought. In dream. In the cold silence of night, when the house creaks and the shadows seem to move, his gaze follows, unblinking, patient, eternal. The strange genius child with a dark obsession has become more than a story. He is a legend. A curse. A ghost stitched into the fabric of history. And he will never vanish completely. Because some minds are too dark to die. And some obsessions never end. Thank you for walking with me through this unsettling history. If the photograph unsettled you, if the whispers linger in your thoughts tonight, remember this. History hides more than it reveals. And sometimes, The past does not stay buried. Be careful when you stare into old photos, when you read the forgotten language of the dead, when you hear footsteps in the silence of your home, because the boy from 1899 may still be watching, and he is waiting for someone to continue his work.